Welcome everybody to Rattlesnake TV. I'm your host Jake, and today we're going to be breaking down the interview between Piers Morgan and Andrew Tate. Now you will notice throughout this interview that similar to Piers Morgan, I am neither left nor right, and I do not have an agenda. I do not have a dog in the race, as they say. You'll notice, guys, over the last few weeks, Tate's done a few interviews with the likes of Patrick Bet-David and Tucker Carlson, interviews that I thought went really well, and now he's moved on to doing an interview with Piers Morgan. Now, it's an interesting choice for me because Piers Morgan is getting big numbers at the moment. He did Neil deGrasse Tyson, he did Jordan Peterson, and a lot of his clips have been going viral. But in terms of interview chemistry, I thought it was a strange choice because Piers Morgan is not a guy that you want to go on his show to talk about deep philosophical issues, which is what I think Andrew Tate does. Tate has some very controversial opinions, but at the same time, he has opinions that require a lot of nuance and a lot of deeper thought. And what Piers Morgan tends to do is just try and nail people to a wall. He tries to get people into a corner and have all of these little gotcha moments. So in saying that, I think Tate would have definitely known what was coming, and Tate would have definitely known what he was in for. So it was an interesting choice. I think maybe the reason why he went on was because he thought that he could intellectually dominate Piers Morgan, which you'll see that he did. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our combatants for the evening. Now in the blue corner, we have got four-time kickboxing world champion and multi-millionaire and international playboy, Andrew Tate, the top G. And then in the red corner, we have got the host of Piers Uncensored and formerly the host of Good Morning Britain until he left, Piers Morgan. Initially, I was actually pretty frustrated with this interview. I was listening to it and thinking, where is Tate? Where is Top G? Where is the guy that won't take any bullshit and that's loud and proud and says what he means and means what he says? He was missing for the first half of the interview, but then as I kept watching it, my frustration subsided because I realized that this was probably out of the playbook for him. Now, what I mean when I say that is that I believe throughout this interview, Andrew Tate knew what was coming. He knew that he was dealing with an extremely combative interviewer in the form of Piers Morgan. And what he did was he played this like a chess game. At the same time, I also think that he's trying to appeal to a certain demographic in this interview. So there's going to be a lot of people who don't like him who will be watching this rather than the people who actively seek him out on his channels. So there's going to be a lot of people who don't like him. At the same time, there's going to be a lot of people who are seeing him for the first time. So he has to carry himself with a certain demeanor that disarms people who are seeing him for the first time or who don't like him already. Now, I think you'll see as the interview goes that Tate treats this like a chess match or a fight in the sense that Piers Morgan comes out like an aggressive fighter. He's got his hands up and he's ready to go and he's throwing his biggest and wildest shots at Tate and trying to take him out in the first 3 rounds with pure power. But Tate keeps his guard strong, keeps his defense up and just parries and slips every single shot that comes his way. Now, for the first few rounds, I think there's a little bit of back and forth. I think that Piers scores a few points, Andrew scores a few points, but then as the interview progresses, I think that Piers punches himself out, Andrew sticks to the game plan, he bobs and weaves and parries some of the shots and just sticks behind the jab. As the fight goes on though, Piers becomes worn out and takes his opportunity to defeat his wearied opponent. So, without further ado guys, here it is. Let's get into the first clip.
Let's go through something,
Sure.
right? So you said this about Me Too stroke rape. This is probably 40% of the reason I moved to Romania. In Eastern Europe, none of this garbage flies. You go to the police and say, he raped me back in 1988. They'll say, well, you should have done something about it back then.
Yeah, so the point I was making was obviously at the height of the Me Too scandal, and also if we look at Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, there's been a lot of high-profile cases where men have been accused of things they did not do without evidence, and their lives have been completely and utterly destroyed.
Right.
When I say these things, people sit and say that, oh, he hates women. I don't hate women. I think rape is disgusting. I would take a stronger stance on rape than the British government. I think these people should face the death penalty. But to sit and say that women without evidence can go forward and just make up accusations against men, even though they've been repeatedly proven to destroy men's lives at will, is absolutely and utterly
What about a
asinine.
So Tate actually makes a really good point here. And he says that What he's basically saying, in my opinion, is that we live in the West in a gynocentric social order where it's very, very difficult for men who have been falsely accused of things to defend themselves, because a lot of people believe in the notion of believe all women, for example. And if you're a man who's been through something like this, like I have, then you can really relate to what Tate's saying here.
Still something came out of your mouth. Do you accept that when that appears on TikTok, a lot of young, maybe not as smart as you, young men, right? Impressionable, teenagers, will read that and go, what's he saying here? Is he saying that rape doesn't exist?
No, I completely. I'm not going to sit here as a professional and say that I can't be taken out of context. What I will say is that one small sentence you've taken was from a 1-hour video where I explained that, of course, rape is disgusting. Of course, everybody should be punished for their crimes regardless of when they happen. But people are not perfect, male and female. And if you give women the opportunity to destroy men's lives without evidence, there's going to be a contingent of women who will do that.
And you'll see here that Piers basically realizes that he's digging for something and he'll just keep shoveling dirt, so he just moves on.
Do you think women are the property of men?
No. The point I was making...
Why have you said they are?
Because I made a religious point. I said that when a man marries a woman, the woman's father walks her down the aisle, and hands her away to the man. Traditionally, this is what it says in the Bible. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I live in the most religious country in the world.
So you do think that the woman becomes the men?
I think she takes his last name.
I mean, let's watch the clip that you said about this,
sure,
so that we can get it in context.
So I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle to marry the groom, the father walks next to her and gives her away. True or false?
Absolutely.
But I've been married twice, as it turns out, and on both occasions, I didn't believe that the woman was being handed to me as chattel, as property.
Perhaps the way the reason I'm asked that question repeatedly, and I'm asked in a loaded way.
So would you rephrase what you said there?
Now, that's an interesting point about phrasing. The way I would say things before I was famous, I have to take personal responsibility and accept that if I make a video that 500 people see and 1% of them misunderstand it, that's not a problem. If I make a video that 5 million people see and 1% of them understand.
So specifically on that point, I think my sister is her husband's property.
She took his last name. She married him. She wanted to join his family. She has said it herself.
Right. So she's
still a sovereign individual. She's absolutely not a sovereign individual.
Property means that the husband owns your sister.
Listen, my friend, if we want to argue about this, you need to go back to the Bible, to the Quran. You need to argue with religious leaders.
I'm not talking about anything in the Bible or Quran.
But that's what it says.
No, I'm asking you what you think.
I think that if a woman marries a man and she decides to take his last name, that they have different roles and responsibilities within that marriage, and I believe that.
That's not the question.
I believe the father. I am. The father hands her.
Don't behave like a politician.
The father hands her to the man.
So I got to say here, first few rounds, Tate's landed a few nice shots, but he takes an L in this round. If he could have this one again, he definitely would, because to say that another human being is your property is just completely out of order. And that's probably one of those things where it's just sort of lost in translation a little bit. I think what he meant to say was that he's making that religious point where the woman is walked down the aisle by her father and she's given to that man. She takes his last name and now she becomes his responsibility. He has to provide for her, protect her to the same standard as her father. So there's a deeply religious and spiritual meaning to what he's saying there. But for him to say it like she's his property is wrong. And I think that he has to take the L here. He'll take the blow and try and move on.
You went on to say about authority over women. If I have a responsibility over her, I must have a degree of authority. Yeah. For the same reason, if I have responsibility over and people are going to use their mind, it's an example, an analogy. Responsibility over a child, I have to have some authority. Yeah. So you believe as part of your ownership or your property of the woman, you have authority over her.
No, I believe if you have...
That's what you said.
I believe if you have responsibility over something, you have to have a degree of authority or you can't be responsible.
Yeah, but authority means, again, that you're the boss.
The point I'm making, if you'll please let me finish at this point, the point I was trying to make was talking about the safety of a woman. She was walking alone at night. And I was saying, well, I wouldn't let my woman walk alone at night. And they said, well, you're not in charge of her. You don't get to decide what she does. I said, I understand, but if I'm responsible for her safety and I'm the person who's burdened with making sure she is safe, I have to have the authority to say, don't put yourself in unsafe situations. The two things are linked.
So this is a tough one because Piers has segued here from landing a few good shots on Tate by saying that you said that they were property, and everyone can pretty much relate to the fact that women aren't men's property. But now he's saying, does that relate to you having authority over a woman? Now, I think that Tate kind of fails to distinguish between these two as much as he should have. I think that he should have cut that off and separate the two issues, because they're not really as related as what Piers is trying to make them. Because when you are in a relationship with a woman, and if it's your job to protect and provide for this woman, then you should have a level of authority, and not authority in an oppressive or a tyrannical way. It's authority by mutual consent.
And I'm explaining very, very clearly. If I have responsibility over said subject, I have to have authority over it. So let me say you have children, right?
Right.
You have responsibility for them.
No, I have legal authority over my children. That is very different to having legal authority over my wife or my female partner.
Completely. But the point I'm trying to make...
So you accept that?
I accept that
Because you used the analogy of responsibility for a child.
My friend, these are very...
These are actually really important things.
They're important things, but you interrupt me every 5 seconds, so it's hard for me to actually explain my point. The point I'm making here is very simple. You have children, and you're responsible for their safety, so you're going to have authority to say, don't go out at night, perhaps, because you want them to be safe.
I have legal authority.
You have a legal authority.
Yeah.
Legal authority. I'm saying that if I had a woman, and the question where you've raised this soundbite from, I was asked about protecting a woman, making sure she's safe. And I would say I wouldn't want her to go out at night on her own because I'm responsible for her safety. And someone said, well, you don't have authority over her to do that. And I said, well, no, I can't force her to stay inside. But if she were to ask me, how do I protect myself at night? I would say, well, you should stay inside. That's how you should do it.
I don't have an issue with what
So
you
we
just
agree.
Said. No.
It's the semantics.
No, it's not.
What he means here is that he wants to be the man in the relationship. He wants to be the leader in the relationship. He wants to provide and protect, and he will lay down his life for the woman if he has to. But at the same time, he has some level of authority. Now, the key point here is the intent with authority. It's not a tyrannical authority. It's not an oppressive authority. He's not ruling with an iron fist. What he means by that is that he wants to be the person who has the final say in the decision-making in a relationship or a household. And as bad as that sounds, this is one of those ideas that requires a lot of nuance. And this is a deep discussion. They could have talked the whole hour and a half about this specific topic if Piers Morgan wasn't so boneheaded about it and just hammering in on the semantics of the word authority. It's an interesting conversation to be had, and it sort of relates more to a man being a leader in a household and a man being a leader in a relationship, which is what we should be doing, than it does to the property argument. Another point there is that I think that Tate should have said specifically that this is the dynamic that he would like to have in his relationship. People can have any dynamics they want, but he is a man who wants to be providing and protecting, wants to be a leader, and then in turn, he wants to have that level of authority in his relationship. Tate would have been better off just to say, well, she can do what she wants and she can go walking at 2 a.m. In the ghetto if she wants to, but I just wouldn't be with a woman like that. I think that's the best answer in that regard.
You said this, in general, this is also one of the reasons men find youth attractive. You want to blow up the internet? I'll blow up the internet right effing now. The reason 18 and 19-year-olds are more attractive than 25-year-olds is because they've been through less dick. People say, oh, you can't say that, but yes, I can. A 19-year-old is more attractive than a 26-year-old woman, and I'll tell you why. Because that 26-year-old has talked to more guys, been to the club more times, been effed and dumped more times, more arguments, more mess, more for me to clean up.
I want you guys to watch this one really closely here, because every time Tate tries to talk here, Piers interrupts him. And this is one of the typical interviewing techniques of Piers Morgan. If somebody's ever making a good point, Piers will just interrupt them every few seconds and he'll just ask them random questions that are related and unrelated to the topic.
That is misogyny.
Why?
Because you are encouraging a mindset about 25-year-old women that makes them sound out to be infinitely less desirable than 18, 19-year-olds, and having effectively been having too much sex to be taken in a more respectful way.
Well, firstly, even if that was the case, that wouldn't be misogyny.
But what did you mean by what you said?
That's not misogyny because it's not anti-women. I'm saying that an 18...
So, guys, misogyny is the contempt or inner resentment of women. Clearly, this is not a case of misogyny, because what he's saying is that he likes a woman with a lower body count. So an 18, 19, 20-year-old, whatever, she might have been with 3 men. A 25-year-old is more likely to have been with more men. Like, that's just common sense. More years, more runs on the board, more body count. It's pretty simple. Tate also is a little bit light on here as well. He's still in that stage of the interview where he's sort of feeling him out. He's got the defense up. He's staying behind the jab. But what he should have done here is just double down, because this is a very straightforward point. Men prefer youth. We don't like women who have been with lots of men. This is something that throughout history has been ubiquitous. Any man would be lying if he said that he would prefer a 25-year-old woman who's been with 50 men than a 20-year-old woman who's been with 2 men. Any guy who tells me otherwise is lying. If I were Piers Morgan here, the intelligent way to go about this conversation isn't to try and back him into a corner and get another gotcha moment. The intelligent thing here would be to say, well, an 18 or 19-year-old woman doesn't have any life experience. Would you really want to be with an 18-year-old, 19-year-old woman who's just fresh out of school and hasn't traveled and hasn't experienced life and hasn't had her heart broken? I think that would be a more intelligent way to go about things rather than just trying to say that he's a misogynist. I mean, come on, it's so cheap.
Or a 19-year-old woman would be more desirable.
Pretty anti-25-year-old women.
Anti-25-year-old women we can argue, but not misogynist.
Well, that's misogyny then, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Well, being anti any woman at all is misogyny.
Not when I'm...
See, this is a point that really gets under my skin. Piers Morgan says being anti any woman is misogyny. So what, men are not allowed to have standards these days is what you're saying. So a man is not allowed to say that he prefers a woman with a lower body count. A man is not allowed to say that he prefers younger women. These are things that men have always desired since the dawn of time. But now, if you say that, all of a sudden you're a misogynist. Women who have standards are hailed as queens. You want a tall man, you want a successful man, you want a charming man, etc., etc., etc. Yes, queen. You go, girl, manifest that. But if a man has standards, all of a sudden he's a misogynist. If he has any standards whatsoever, is basically what Piers Morgan is saying here.
Not what I'm saying that women are beautiful and attractive at a certain age and saying the age.
You're saying 18, 19-year-olds are more attractive than 25.
Well, than ageist, perhaps, but misogynistic, absolutely
exactly,
not.
But you just accepted it was misogyny.
No, I didn't. You said it was misogyny. I'm telling you, no, it's not.
Where do you draw the line if you're Piers Morgan here? I mean, is it okay if Andrew Tate says that he finds a 20-year-old girl more attractive than a 50-year-old woman? I mean, is that okay, or is it just the 7-year difference? What about a 20-year-old girl versus a 35-year-old woman? I mean, where's the line? There's no consistency here. This is why Piers Morgan is not really fit to have these conversations, because all he wants to do is nail Tate down on stupid little semantics.
Do you regret saying stuff like this?
I don't.
And actually, do you see it as weakness to admit you shouldn't have said something like that?
No, I don't live with regret. I think what's happened is that, like I said, long format content, arguments with feminists, arguments with the toxic masculine crowd, arguments with the left, and they're going to take a small clip, small sentence from ours, and they're going to try and paint me as a
But
villain.
I'm not left or right.
I don't know what you are, Piers.
Exactly. That's my point. No, but that's my point.
And I understand, and you're doing exactly as I knew would happen on this interview.
This annoys me. Piers Morgan does this little thing here. He goes, oh, I'm not left or right. Oh, that's my point. That's my point. Piers Morgan is clearly on the left side of the political spectrum. If you look at his tirades about gun laws, and if you look at some of his interviews about feminism and what he's saying to Tate now and how he's trying to get him on transphobia and he's trying to get him on misogyny and all of these leftist talking points. I mean, there are some things where he's maybe slightly more conservative, but for him to sit there and say that he's somehow immune to political bias and that he's neither left nor right and that he's this sort of all-discerning creature is just absolute garbage.
I know
I'm asking you, do you believe it?
I believe that it's more likely a 26-year-old's had more partners than a 19-year-old.
Right. You don't know that.
I don't know that. You're right.
In fact, there could be absolutely no evidence for that whatsoever.
Completely agree.
So why say it? Why stigmatize all 26-year-old women?
It's not about, we're repeating ourselves here.
Well, not really. I'm just trying to get to what you actually believe.
I believe that men find youth attractive in general. I believe that in the context of the conversation.
25-year-old women aren't old.
This point, I think that Tate would love to have this back. He said, Piers Morgan says, there's no evidence whatsoever that a 25-year-old would have had more partners than a 19-year-old. Now, to me, that is one of the most commonsensical statements that you could ever make, saying that it is likely that a 25-year-old has had more partners than a 19-year-old. Because she's 6 years older. I don't really know if that's what Tate wanted to do, but I think he should have defended himself there a little bit more and doubled down a little bit more, but we'll continue. I digress.
You don't forget how many people you've been in love with.
Let's say 10. I mean, I've been in love, and I certainly believe that men and women, when they work together, it's the most beautiful force on the planet. I believe in family. I believe in children. I believe in...
If you believe in family and children and love, why are you single?
I'm not single.
Well, you're not married. That's what I mean.
Well, if I was married, the last thing I would do is advertise it to the feral psychopaths on the internet. So
I'm not a feral psychopath.
Well,
you called me friend earlier.
Can be debated, Piers. But the point I'm making as a whole.
So this is the point where Tate starts to go a little bit more top G here, and he basically calls the people who have cancelled him feral psychopaths on the internet, which is exactly what they are. And he loosely calls Piers Morgan a feral psychopath, which he's obviously not a feral psychopath, but it's quite a funny little statement. And this is where he gets a little bit more humorous. He gets a little bit more dominant throughout the interview, and it gets much, much more interesting from here on out.
But you believe in the concept of marriage?
Completely. That's what we were talking about the whole time.
What do you think?
We talked about a man giving a woman away. Okay. I believe in marriage more than anybody. In fact, I believe in marriage no, please. Okay. I believe in marriage in the traditional sense. I believe a man has a duty to stand up and be a real man. I believe that the problem with the world today that we are facing is that not enough men are sticking to the age-old ways of masculinity. Mm-hmm. I believe that me standing up and saying a man must protect a woman and provide for her, so he needs to make sure that she's safe. He needs a degree of authority to protect her. I have no
problem with...
But people do have a problem with it. That's the world we're in now.
Andrew.
Now, this is the point where Tate starts to really dominate. And what he does is he clicks into that mode where he's a little bit more aggressive, he's a little bit more assertive, and he's not copying, just being interrupted every 5 seconds. He's saying, no, listen to me. And what you have to do when somebody interrupts you is you have to not stop talking. Now, this is something that happens in conversation all the time. If you're ever at a party or just at a social gathering, or if you're ever at work or having a debate of your own, and you're talking to somebody who has no conversational skills and always tries to interrupt you, which happens all the time, what you have to do is not break stride. So if I'm talking like this and somebody's trying to interrupt me, I'm just going to keep on talking. And if I have to, I'm going to raise my voice a little bit just to overpower them slightly. And it's quite easy to do. And Tate has been very reluctant to pull that trigger so far, but now he's starting to do that, and he's starting to go toe-to-toe with Piers Morgan, who is a conversational bully, but he's about to get beaten down.
But there was also, I think, quite a disturbing piece that BuzzFeed did. And it talked about the negative impact of young, impressionable male minds when they've read or seen some of the more inflammatory things you've said. And they quoted, for example, Sandy, 22, from Washington. My father's gone from a man who minored in women's studies in college, who was kind and in touch with his emotions, treated all people, men and women around him, with kindness, to a man who says that whenever he sees an effeminate male stranger, he gets an overwhelming urge to murder them. He loves podcasts. He listens to a lot of podcasts. I know he's listened to Andrew Tate.
Whoa. Let's stop for a second. Let's be professional here, Piers, because you're a professional, as am I. First, she said, did you say that my father went? She said, my father has gone.
Her father.
That's a full-grown man, firstly. So we're talking about my impact on children. You just talked about a full-grown man here. Secondly, I've never talked about murdering effeminate men in anything online ever, in any context ever. So I don't know why they have taken some random person I've never met in the world who's full-grown, an adult, and come to their own conclusions who I've never met and lumped his name in with mine. That is absolutely unfair on every level. I didn't read this BuzzFeed. I didn't read this BuzzFeed article, but after hearing the first point, I know it's trash. That is complete garbage.
Okay, now anybody who knows BuzzFeed will know that this is one of the most ideological leftist sacks of verbal garbage that you could ever have the displeasure of reading. And the fact that Piers has brought this into the discussion, first of all, makes me think that he actually didn't plan this. I'm thinking that somebody definitely had to script this, because you can kind of tell by Piers's body language that this isn't really something that he's happy about having to read out. Tate handles this pretty much perfectly, but notice that Piers talks about the negative impacts on young, impressionable male minds because of what you've said to Tate. Now, the best way to handle this sort of ridiculous statement is to treat it with scorn, with ridicule, and to be irate about it. And that's exactly what Tate did. This was actually a 22-year-old person's father And Piers Morgan had just said that it was a young, impressionable male mind. This is an absolutely catastrophic moment in the debate for Piers, and it just goes downhill from here.
Say that I'm the reason this man believes what he believes.
I've seen a quote from you, and you can tell me what you feel here about this.
Sure.
You talk about people don't want to see men dressed up in dresses, transgender.
That's not exactly what I said.
What did you say?
I said the reason I am so popular and I'm so famous is that there's a large contingent of men who don't want to wear makeup, who still want to make money, go to the gym, be strong, drive a fast car, be traditionally masculine, and don't want to be shamed for that, and they don't want to be called toxic for that. That is the reason I'm so massively famous. That is what I said.
What do you think of transgender people?
That's nothing to do with me. I'm not transgender, and I don't understand the issue like they do. They
Are you transphobic? Do you consider yourself that?
Transphobic? What? Afraid?
Well, it kind of, yeah. You have
I don't live in fear, my friend. I have no problem.
Do you have a dislike of transgender people?
I don't know any transgender people.
But do you have a dislike of what they stand for, what they are?
No. Why would I?
I don't know.
That's not my issue.
Transgender issue isn't really something that he talks about. He doesn't care if people become transgender. And watch how he handles this, because it's just perfect. He doesn't slip into this childish conversation and let Piers Morgan get a little gotcha moment. He basically just cuts it off at the knees.
I'm asking you what you personally believe you are.
It's not an issue I discuss. What I do discuss is that...
So you support transgender people?
I support individual liberty. I'm a libertarian.
Yeah, so you support transgender people?
Sure. Why not?
So Piers has tried to do that thing again that he does when somebody's making a good point and making him look like a fool. He just asks a bunch of random questions. Well, what do you think about transgender people? I don't care. They can do what they want. Do you support transgender people? Yeah, sure.
What do you believe about depression? Do you believe depression is a real thing?
I believe that feeling depressed is real. I don't believe depression as a clinical disease is real, no.
Really?
Correct.
You don't believe people can be clinically depressed?
I think PTSD is very real. Unfortunately, I have some friends who suffer from that. I know that feeling depressed is real. I believe that the number one power you have against these things are trying to take control of your own mind and affecting your own life. I believe that it's not healthy to hand over all your power and believe that depression is an outside disease that you can't affect. I know that when I've had difficult periods in my life, and also many of my friends, like I've said, suffered from PTSD and been through terrible things. I've lived a very difficult life, and I know people who have. That the things that made them feel better is when they woke up and said, you know what, I'm not going to allow this to damage me anymore. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight this as hard as I can.
And by the way, on that, I agree.
So we agree.
My favorite speech is the Rocky Balboa one.
Okay, so then we agree. No, we did.
Here's where we don't agree.
Piers.
You don't, hang on. You got to let me interject when I don't agree with you, right? Where I don't agree with you is that there's no such thing as clinical depression. There absolutely is.
Well,
it's a proven scientific medical reality.
So this is a point where a lot of people agree with Tate. Now, Piers Morgan, the cognitive dissonance here is amazing. What Tate's saying is take a bit of personal responsibility. If you get up, you go to the gym, you work hard, you try and progress yourself, then you will be in a better stage in your life and you will ultimately be a healthier person and likely a happier person. That's the natural progression for somebody who gets fit, gets healthy, becomes successful, etc., etc. And anybody who's done those things will be a living testament to that. But what Piers is trying to do here is he's trying to play both sides, which he often does. On one hand, he's trying to say that we live in this age of snowflakes and everyone's so soft. And yeah, I'm not politically correct. Look at me saying everyone's soft. But then on the other hand, what he's saying is think that you have depression. If you have depression and you go to a doctor and they prescribe you SSRIs, well, then you can't argue with that because that's science. Well, the jury's actually kind of out on that one at the moment, Piers, because there's new information and new studies coming out. And I'm pretty sure it was King's College London that had a study come out this year that showed that SSRIs are not actually working in the way that they're intended to. They're not actually changing the chemistry of the brain in the way that they're intended to. And that depression might actually be much more situational than we once thought. What these antidepressants actually are is, for the most part, a placebo effect. Now, these are pretty reputable universities that are doing these studies, so the science is always progressing on these things. And what Tate is basically saying is that if you improve your life, you become happier and healthier, you can beat depression. Now, obviously, there are many different nuanced conversations to be had about brain chemistry and about people who are clinically depressed and they have imbalances in chemicals, etc., etc. But this is not an established science, and he has every right to have this opinion on these things. And Piers Morgan is trying to hammer him into semantics again, and he loses this pretty miserably.
Hey, well, let me explain why. If someone comes to me and says I'm clinically depressed or I feel very, very sad, I would say the first thing you need to do is stop accepting the identity of a clinically depressed person. Stop accepting you have no control over this. And what you need to do is stop identifying that way, and let's work together to try and fight against it.
You are, because
Piers,
somebody with your following says
the thousands of people who have emailed me saying my doctor told me I was clinically depressed and it's a disease that I have got in my brain and I can't be fixed. And I started listening to you and I realized that that's not the case and I can fix my own life, and you're the only person who has ever helped me.
Oh, Andrew.
Thousands of people have emailed me that exact email.
If you think you are single-handedly curing people of clinical depression, you are living in cloud cuckoo land.
I am reading the emails of people who I have cured of clinical depression.
Tate absolutely destroys him with that little monologue there. And Piers Morgan is so smug and flippant about this. Instead of saying, oh, well, tell me about some of those people who have emailed you and said that you helped cure their depression. What was it that you said exactly? And what are your ideas exactly about depression? And how do you think? So say I'm somebody who has clinical depression. I come to you and say, Mr. Tate, I have clinical depression. You don't think depression is real according to you. So tell me, what do I do? There's so many more intelligent ways for Piers Morgan to ask these questions and have a more nuanced conversation about the matter than for him to do what he does here and just be so flippant. And to think that Tate actually hasn't helped people, because I can guarantee you that what he's saying about how he's helped people is 100% true. And these would only be the people that have emailed him, because I know for a fact through myself and talking to other men I know, especially men who are ambitious and work out, and especially men who are into martial arts and being the best version of themselves, what Andrew Tate says resonates with us on a different level. With me, for example, I feel what Tate says in the bottom of my soul. Like, he is one of the most inspirational people I've ever come across in my life. And that's because I'm somebody who's highly motivated, and I enjoy my fitness, and I enjoy my martial arts training, and I enjoy learning about how to become wealthy and all of these things that help you reach your potential as a man, which is 99% of what he talks about. And I tell you what's not inspiring is Piers Morgan with 5 chins. That's not inspiring. So for him to sit there and be so flippant about what Andrew Tate has just said, about how he's saving the lives of young men, which I guarantee you he has, because many, many men these days don't actually have father figures in their homes. Men these days don't have successful men who have achieved things in their lives and achieved great success in their lives to talk to. So hearing a guy like Andrew Tate on the internet who talks about being fit, healthy, making money, and reaching your potential is incredibly inspiring. And I have no doubt that would have helped out some people to no end.
I actually agree with you, it's massively overdiagnosed. I've already said that PTSD is a very real thing. I've already said...
hang on.
Okay.
Again, you're misquoting me. I did not say clinical depression is massively overdiagnosed. I said that people who claim to be depressed but don't have clinical depression, I think that is massively overblown, right? In other words, there are a lot of people who just have a bad day and declare, I've got depression.
I would argue the point that if somebody has depression of any kind, whether it's clinical, whether it exists or not, whether they feel depressed or not, whatever, that taking control of their life, taking personal responsibility and working hard is always going to be the positive, best thing they can possibly do for their life going forward.
How positive
and the people
is
going around
it?
them. So sitting here saying, I don't believe in clinical depression, you don't believe in depression. No, I don't. I believe that people can take control and fight against things. Right. I believe in personal sovereignty.
Right. Fine.
Good. So we agree.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do.
No, we don't.
Piers, you're on my side. You're afraid of being cancelled along with me.
As I said to you from the start,
that's all
I agree with...
Now, for Piers Morgan to make that argument and to say, oh, I believe that there are a lot of people who are soft and they have a bad day and so I've got depression, but he doesn't think that depression is then overdiagnosed. Just think about that for a second. Just think about how illogical that is. And you can see by Tate's face there, that says it all. He really doesn't need to say anything.
Let me talk to you about Alex. Let me talk to you about Alex Jones, right? who I have a bit of history with. He tried to get me deported from the United States.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. What is your view of Alex Jones?
I think that Alex Jones is a sovereign individual who, very much like the rabid left, deserves a chance to speak on his points of view. I think that the truth on issues is usually somewhere in the middle between two extremes. And
So you think Sandy Hook was staged?
I don't know anything about Sandy Hook.
Really? You know he's just been sued by the families for millions and millions.
I have no idea.
You don't know anything about it?
No.
So why would you support someone in public when you know nothing about the most infamous
When
thing
have I
attached to
supported
it?
him in public?
You have supported him in public.
I've been on his podcast.
Yeah, but you said nice things about him.
I say nice things about lots of people.
What do you think of Alex Jones?
I said nice things about you, Piers.
That's fine. So you should. I'm a nice person.
So to sit and say that I've been on a podcast and I say nice things about
But
him
you
means
said
I
you support his right to speak about things like Sandy Hook.
I don't know Sandy Hook. I don't know. And
You know what it was
it was a mass shooting.
of school children.
Okay.
This is just another one of his cheap tricks here. He then he's done the feminism thing, the misogynistic thing. He's done the transgender thing. Oh shit, what can we throw at him? Okay, Alex Jones, extreme right-wing, Nazi, whatever it is. Now, I don't think Alex Jones is an extreme right-wing Nazi. I think that he's obviously a bit of a crazy dude and he's got some crazy points of view, but just like anybody, he's also a smart guy who has some points of view that are really interesting, and he's been right about a lot of things. So what Piers Morgan does is that he judges Alex Jones of a few things that he's said or done that he disagrees with and says he's a terrible person. That is an example of somebody who's not a sophisticated thinker, and that sort of thing does not move our society forward. That sort of thing actually represses dialogue.
Okay, but to sit and
he,
it's actually no. Let's stop for a second. Please don't interrupt me. Here's why I know why you're good at your job. First, you interrupt people a lot, which is good. It's a good skill,
Actually,
and then there you go. Prove me right.
But here's exactly
and the timing's good.
Here's exactly what I do. I only interrupt people like you when you either refuse to answer the question or answer a completely different one.
Sure.
And I want to remind you of what the question was.
Fair enough. That's
Or
fair.
when you misquote me back, which you've done repeatedly through the interview, where you say, "You see, Piers, you agree with me," and the viewer who's been watching will go, "No, he didn't."
Cool, no problem. The other thing you do is
So there you've seen Tate once again put his guard up and just parry. What he's done there is that Piers has interrupted him and interrupted him and interrupted him. So he sits there and his body language is slouched to show that, okay, cool, I'm not really listening. Finish what you've got to say and then let me talk again. Finishes up, he goes, okay, cool, now let me talk again. Brilliant. Just such a subtle little body language art that he's shown there. But he didn't really need to say anything there. His body language just showed it all.
you try and set these traps like now. So you're saying
What's the trap you think I'm setting?
You're saying that I agree with every single point of view a man has.
I literally didn't say that.
You're saying, well, you support Alex Jones.
Why would you misquote me?
Because you're saying you support Alex Jones and you said you've been on his podcast and he said this. I don't know
What do you think of Alex Jones?
I don't know everything he said.
What do you
Piers.
think of him?
I think on his podcast he was cordial. I think he was professional on his podcast. I've also done podcasts with rabid leftists and people who openly hate me.
Is it wrong?
I do a podcast circuit.
Okay.
So and I don't know everything he's ever said.
When somebody like
and I don't know what what you're trying to get me here because I did a podcast.
If you let me get a word in edgeways, I'll tell you.
It's a lame trick.
If you let me get a word in,
Sure.
I will tell you.
Let's go.
Alex Jones said that Sandy Hook didn't happen. It was staged by actors.
Okay.
This compounded the appalling grief of the families of those poor 20 children who were gunned to pieces by a lunatic with an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. They were already grief-stricken beyond belief, and this guy poured petrol onto that grief quite deliberately to make a huge amount of money from his InfoWars fake news bullshit. And as a result, a lot of the families have now sued him, and they've won, and he's going to have to pay back tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in damages to these families. And quite right, it won't do anything about the pain he caused them. Some of them actually have people turn up outside their houses with guns because Alex Jones had told them that these parents were making it all up. They were all staged actors. It was all run by the government. So I simply say to you, now I've told you that, what is your view of Alex Jones?
I don't see why any of that has to do with me. It's very interesting. I've done the guy's podcast. I know him well. He was professional and courteous to me. When I meet somebody and they show me respect, I show them back. Respect. That's what I do, as I did with you.
You respect him?
If somebody shows me respect, I show them respect back.
So if Adolf Hitler showed you respect, you'd respect him back?
That's a stupid question, Piers.
It's not. It's a logical extension of your argument.
No, if in 1931 I was walking through Germany and a man come up to me and said, sorry for bumping into you, I'd say, sorry, no problem, mate. I'd show respect back. I don't know, what are you trying to say? That I sanction the Holocaust?
You literally...
Headline tomorrow, Andrew Tate respects Adolf Hitler. I can just see it. But this is another thing, and it is a stupid question. He calls him out, and it is a stupid question, because what are you trying to say here? Are you trying to say that he respects Adolf Hitler? Why? What? It's just asinine. The fact that he went on Alex Jones's podcast and probably shares a few views with him as well. I mean, Piers, you probably share a few views with Alex Jones too. He's trying to say that the fact that he shows respect to Alex Jones in that way means that, oh, well, you would show respect to Adolf Hitler. Let me tell you this. That is another gigantic logical fallacy. And that one is called a false equivalency, because there is no equivalency between Alex Jones and Adolf Hitler, Piers Morgan.
What do you think a feminist is?
Well, let's not change subject here, Piers. Stay on the
Well,
subject.
you mentioned feminism.
Completely, but you're trying to get away from the point, because what you did is you're trying to say, because I did a podcast, I sanction all of this person's views. And I'm saying I do 5 podcasts a week. I do 5 podcasts a week, and I don't sanction 100% the views of any other person on the planet, because I'm an individual, and he has an individual views, as do you. So I don't know why you're trying to come at me with one of his views and pretend that's something to do with me.
Because it's a pretty big view.
No, but it's a lame trick, Piers, and you're better than this.
Brilliant. Once again, Tate is at this point absolutely dominating this interview. And what he's done there is he's basically just called him out for exactly what he's done. He just goes, it's a lame trick, Piers. And it's true, because what Piers is doing here is one of the most common logical fallacies that you can possibly perpetrate, and it's an appeal to emotion. I don't know if you guys have watched the interview that he did with Ben Shapiro a number of years ago, where Ben Shapiro absolutely dragged him across the coals by saying, you are a bully and you stand on the graves of the children at Sandy Hook. And that is what he's doing here again. So I'm going to do a breakdown of that interview as well. But notice here that that's exactly what Piers Morgan's doing. He's standing on the graves of the children at Sandy Hook and basically saying, if you don't agree with me on this matter, and if you don't also hate Alex Jones, and if you don't boycott him from everything, then you don't care about the dead children at Sandy Hook and their grieving families.
So let's move on.
Would you,
it's lame, and let's move on.
Putin had a podcast, would you go on it?
Sure.
You would? Great. Okay, let me know what you're talking about.
If Vladimir Putin had a podcast, I'd go on it. If Joe Biden had a podcast, I'd go on it. If a feminist has a podcast, I'll go on it. If Piers Morgan has a podcast, I'll go on it. If Alex Jones, I don't see the point you're making. There's no point here. You're digging, but there's nothing to find.
Well, I'm not. I'm taking your position that if somebody shows you respect them.
I think that.
I'm saying there are lots of people in the world I do not respect. If Vladimir Putin showed me respect, I would not respect him.
That's your opinion. But
no, it's my view. What's your view?
Okay, that's your view. Well, your
view is you would.
You're sitting here, Piers, saying that I'm on uncensored show, and in your intro you said that it's important that we don't have echo chambers and we have varying and that we have varying opinions.
Correct.
But then you're saying the people you don't like, you wouldn't go on their podcast.
No.
So you are a hypocrite.
No.
I will go on anybody's podcast and discuss any point.
I think that this is potentially the most important part of the whole interview. Piers Morgan says to Tate, well, if Vladimir Putin had a podcast, would you go on it? Tate goes, yeah. If Joe Biden had one, I would go on it too. I mean, this is what we need in the world. We need dialogue between people. So, of course, if Vladimir Putin had a podcast, he'd go on it, because maybe he could talk some sense into him, or maybe he could be the one who gets through to him. I don't know when we decided this, but it was sometime in the recent past that anybody who has ideas that you don't agree with, we don't talk to them. That is incredibly unhealthy, and Piers Morgan's just showed his true colours here. He's showed that he doesn't want to talk to people who he's ideologically opposed to, unless, of course, it probably gets him good ratings. Then he'd do it.
I think you understand what censorship means, do you? Like a lot of words we've had problems with today.
You're just saying what do you
think censorship means?
No, but the point I'm trying to make here.
Hang on. What do you think censorship means?
Don't hide from the fact that you're saying you will only do podcasts with people you like.
Why do you think that's censorship?
No, that's your prerogative. My prerogative is
What does it do with censorship?
I'll discuss opinions with anybody, and I've done hard left wing. Why are you not asking me about the podcasts I've done for the people who are hard liberal left wing?
By the way, I don't care whether they're left or right. Okay. Extremists to me are all nuts, right?
Then we agree.
Yes.
So perfect.
Good.
Next subject.
All right, here's my next subject. It was a very serious case here.
Jesus. And before you move on, sorry, Piers, but before you move on, I do find it kind of disingenuous. And I know we're on a show, and I don't have a personal problem with you, but it is kind of disingenuous to try and sit here and lump me in with some school shooting. That's nothing to do with me.
So this is the point of the interview where Tate seals the victory. He absolutely obliterates him on this point about Alex Jones and Sandy Hook and just makes him look like a bit of an idiot. And then after that, he's won the exchange, and then he holds his feet to the fire and he holds him accountable for it. Game, set, match.
Should young men, though, all aspire to be like you?
Should young men aspire to work very hard, have no criminal record, become multimillionaires, protect and provide for the women close to them, be sovereign so they can stand up and have their own points of view in face of cancellation, be able to not be mentally intimidated when they go on national TV and there's traps set up for them? Yeah, I believe that confident, strong men who stand up and protect and provide for women are a good thing for the world and a good force for the world. And I don't think that I put a magic spell on anybody. I think there's a whole bunch of men in the world who understands my value. And if men grow up to be like me, you're gonna have a whole bunch of people with no criminal record, dedicated athletes, who protect and provide for the people close to them, are fantastic for the economy.
This monologue is him doing a victory lap. He's won the debate, he's won the argument, and now he's just dancing around Piers Morgan's unconscious carcass.
And I'm certainly not the worst influence out here, Piers. You have Lil Nas twerking on the devil on music videos, which our children are digesting. You have drill artists singing about stabbing people to death in the middle of a knife crime epidemic. You have rabid psychopaths on whether the right or the left announcing violence on the other side.
And that's a brilliant comparison to make as well, because you do have Lil Nas X twerking on the devil, and you do have drill artists rapping about stabbing people to death. Now, I believe in freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and that you can do what you want. But if we want to talk about danger to the youth, let's talk about that before we talk about Andrew Tate, who's inspiring young men to become the best versions of themselves.
You have all these insanities in the world. And because I sit here and say, yeah, perhaps, now you've laid it out and it offended you, I understand.
I didn't say it offended me.
Okay, cool.
I just read you the things.
You read things that you said they could be offensive, and some people are offended.
Well, some people definitely were offended.
Absolutely. That's fine.
And honestly, I think some of the things you said were genuinely offensive and misogynist.
Okay, so they offended you.
Like
I said earlier, so they offended you, which is fine. I said they offended you, you interrupted me, and now you're saying they offended you, which is fine. But the point I'm trying to make is this. I'm not the devil. There are certainly worse people than me, and
I don't disagree
and they exist.
With that.
And I'm saying that my core tenets for the people who don't understand me are self-accountability, so I'm accountable for everything I've ever said. My core tenets are responsibility, so I'm responsible for everything I've said. My core tenets are traditional masculinity to a degree, which involves protecting and providing for women.
Now, furthermore, what I would have said if I was Tate, if I wanted to poke the bear a little bit, is how about the gynocentric social order that we live in? How about the feminist social order that we live in? How about the education system that's feminizing young men? Is that dangerous? I believe that's dangerous. How about the toxic masculinity narrative? How about the believe all women narrative? How about all of the young men who have had their reputations dragged through the mud because of false allegations? How about the generation of weak young men that's being created that can't protect themselves or anybody around them for that matter, that in turn are becoming more of a danger to society the weaker they get? So that's going to be it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to be doing lots of these reaction videos and debate breakdowns, etc. Plus a little bit more street talk and whatever you guys want. So leave me a comment, write me an email, tell me what you'd like to see. So until next time, guys, this has been your host, Jake the Rattlesnake with Rattlesnake TV. Get informed, get involved.